You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and coming off the heels of a wild Thursday Night Football matchup, we're going to dive in and make predictions for the remainder of Week 8 in the NFL. The Rams coming in and taking down the Vikings 30-20 in upsetting fashion. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp made their returns in this game, and it wound up being a large part of the difference in how the Rams were able to get it done here. Defense also played extremely well on top of that, and I've got to say, I didn't see that coming. I also didn't anticipate Puka Nacua playing in that game, but I'm excited that he got to come back and put up such a big performance, because now this kind of blows the NFC West wide open. If you look at how close things are currently in the NFC West, it's arguably one of the tightest divisions right now with no clear leader, especially when you look at the overall standings of the division. So there is plenty to look forward to with that NFC West. And while I'm disappointed I got the pick wrong, I'm excited for that division. I'm excited for the Rams, because with that trade rumor going around about Cooper Kupp, there was the potential that, maybe they start moving on from some of these past pieces from the Super Bowl team and start to look forward. But I think with how that offense looked last night, I think those rumors might have gotten put to rest. That all being said, we're diving in, talking the rest of week number 8. Comment down below. Let me hear your picks, your predictions. Comment away as I dive through them myself here. But we'll start off first with the early window of Sunday. No London games, no early games this week, which is nice. You don't have to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning to get yourself ready for some football if you don't want to on a Sunday here. But we start first with Baltimore heading into Cleveland to take on the Browns. Now, the Browns are set to start Jameis Winston as their quarterback, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not 100% sure of what to expect out of this Cleveland team now. It really does come down to just Jameis Winston's overall performance. He looked good in the opportunity he got last week, leading to a touchdown drive, kept the game somewhat close for Cleveland in a game that felt like the offense was basically dead in the water. But I think the big thing for Cleveland in this game is not necessarily what they're going to do offensively, but defensively, and it really comes down to stopping that Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry combo that they have going on right now, totaling a whopping 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns, averaging 6.3 yards attempt between the two when they're carrying the football. Cleveland's run defense will have their hands full. They're 15th in rushing yards per game allowed, with also 8 touchdowns on top of that. There is going to be a very heavy workload on Cleveland's hands, and they've got to find some sort of way to deal with all that designed running and just the scheming that they do between just those two guys alone. Never mind what Lamar can do with his arm and what he's been able to do with his arm this season, because the passing game has really opened up now that teams have to really respect Derrick Henry in that backfield. On top of that, I'll be watching Nick Chubb in this matchup here, because I'll be curious to see how he looks in game number 2 of his return. And this is going up against the best run defense in the NFL in Baltimore, who's allowing just a measly 68 yards per game. Teams cannot run against them right now, and they're also allowing a league low 3.3 yards per attempt. Nick Chubb's first appearance this season wasn't anything to, write home about, but with all things considered, I mean, if he's starting out a little bit slow as he's working his way back and kind of getting into the thick of things again, I can't really blame him, considering just how wild that knee injury was and the fact that he's back at this point. I'm ready to see what he does. I just don't necessarily know how well it's going to go, considering how good Baltimore is against the run. I really do think that, as crazy as it might sound, the Browns might have a better shot at winning this game, focusing more so on the passing game and maybe working with Nick Chubb in the passing game more than just trying to run the football right at Baltimore, who's not letting anyone do anything right now. Baltimore is the league's best scoring offense with 31 points per game, and you have to find a way to keep pace with them. And it's either trying to find a way to run the football successfully and keep the ball out of their hands, or just try to go shot for shot with Jameis Winston, who, we've seen him throw 30 touchdowns, but also 30 picks in the same season. So I'll be curious to see how they attack there. And with Cleveland, the way they've looked, I mean, with Deshaun Watson under center, the offense was averaging like 15.5 points per game. So it'll be interesting to see how this game kind of works itself out, with so many interesting variables on Cleveland's end changing over the last couple of weeks. But I do think that Baltimore does come out victorious in this matchup, and I have them winning pretty comfortably. I'm a little bit worried about what Cleveland looks like in this game here, and Baltimore is just on an absolute tear at the current moment. And if they don't come in and just completely blow out the Browns, I'd be kind of shocked. So I have them going 31-17 Baltimore victory. Second game we'll look at we have ourselves the Tennessee Titans going into Detroit to take on the Lions here. This is, without question, a trap game for the Lions. The Lions are sitting on a minus an 11.5 spread at this current moment here, and I'm not a betting channel, not a betting guy, but I do love seeing what those Vegas odds look like, and when I saw this one, I can't say I'm really surprised, just considering how good Detroit looks right now and how poorly Tennessee has looked themselves. I mean, you have two teams right now that are just on like complete opposite ends of the spectrum. You have Detroit, who's currently sitting on a +6 turnover differential, which puts them at third best in the league. And then you have Tennessee, who's sitting on a -9 turnover differential, which is second worst in the league, believe it or not. There's a team worse than -9 right now. But I mean, Detroit's putting up 30 points a game. Tennessee's barely putting up 18 themselves. Detroit is the third best rushing attack, the fourth best passing attack in terms of yards per game. And I will say that when you look at Tennessee's numbers, it's a little bit interesting defensively because they're actually ranked third in passing yards per game allowed and seventh in rushing yards per game allowed. But when you look at some of the teams that they've played and just the performance that we've gotten out of Tennessee so far, the numbers could be a little bit skewed in a way that is not necessarily the truth of where they are, because they played Miami -2, and that game was an absolute disaster on Miami's end. They played Indianapolis, and their offense last week did not look good at all. They caught the Giants in a really tough spot, and at this point now, with the Giants sitting, or I'm sorry, not the Giants, the Jets, with the Jets sitting at, I believe, what is 2-5 right now, if I'm not mistaken, they have not nearly been as successful offensively as they should have been, and they did not look great in week 1. They also caught Chicago before the offense really caught fire. So on top of that, you have a bye week in you already, so you're already a game behind other teams, so you've played one less game at that. I don't really believe the numbers of Tennessee's defense too much. I just think that circumstance has kind of caught them in, put them in a good spot statistically. But going up against this Detroit offense, we're going to really find out just how true these numbers are to where Tennessee is defensively. I don't think the Lions hold back. I think the Lions are probably going to come in. They are going to be physical up front like they love to be. I'm really expecting a tough time for Tennessee overall moving the football offensively. And if what the Lions did to Dallas is like any sort of indication as to what they're going to do, if you're not stopping Detroit, they're just going to keep going. So I'm going to take the Lions 40-17. I think they come in and they bulldoze them, especially being in Detroit. You're welcoming Tennessee into your house. I don't think they're going to have really any issues with Tennessee, unfortunately, considering the way Tennessee is right now. Next game we'll look at is an AFC South clash. We're looking at the Colts taking on the Texans here. First meeting was a pretty tight contest, but since then, Indianapolis and Anthony Richardson both have kind of regressed in a lot of areas here. Indianapolis is also dealing with a lot of injuries that have just kind of hurt the defense in a number of different ways as the season has gone on here. I think Richardson definitely can help Indy against the Houston Texans in this game, but he's got to make good decisions on when he chooses to run, throw the football away, and where he puts the football in certain situations here. He loves to take off when he can. He's got 123 yards on just straight up scrambling per next gen stats right now, and Houston does struggle to deal with mobile quarterbacks when they like to take off and run. According to next gen stats, they're allowing about 174, they've allowed 174 yards and a touchdown against those quarterbacks that like to take off and scramble. So not designed runs, but just like, pass play that turns into a scramble. But I do think that it really does come down to just the overall decision-making and in the way in which Anthony Richardson takes care of the football, because he has had some pretty reckless decisions so far this season that has put the Colts in some pretty bad spots. He's got to take care of it. The other thing I'm worried about with Indianapolis is just defensively how they handle both Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. When Joe Mixon is in there, I think Dameon Pierce even benefits from the whole situation, because when these two guys are together, they're a pretty formidable 1-2 punch. And Joe Mixon right now is on an absolute tear. When he's playing, this Texans offense is a far better unit, far more balanced unit, and you can expect a lot more from them. Mixon's sitting on 401 yards right now and 4 touchdowns in the 4 games this season that he's been able to play in. And on top of that, you're looking at a 45.5% rushing success rate. So more often than not, like every other player, so roughly, give or take, he's basically pulling off something of significant gain. So with Indianapolis allowing the second most rushing yards per game, they're tied for first in runs going over 10 yards allowed on top of that as well. Something tells me that Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce are going to see a lot on the ground, and I'm assuming CJ Stroud's going to be able to pick apart what's a pretty weak secondary right now that's dealing with injuries, missing some guys, and just has not necessarily played the best either. Houston's pass rush is also going to be an issue, and it feels like I'm just ragging on Indianapolis here, but like these are the facts of this game that I'm currently concerned about as far as anything in this game that really matters is popping out to me. Houston's pass rush against the pass protection of Indianapolis will be something to keep an eye on. Houston defensively, 22 sacks on the year, currently sitting at 5th most. They also have a 41.3% pressure rate, which is good for 2nd best in the NFL. Indianapolis' O-line with 10 sacks allowed this season, being the 4th fewest in the league and only allowing about a 34% pressure rate. Should be a fun matchup to watch between the two, but ultimately, I don't quite think that the Colts have enough in the tank right now to be able to take down Houston. I'm really concerned about just some of the things we've seen from Anthony Richardson in the few games we've got from him this year, and the offense arguably enough looked better with Joe Flacco under center, and that really sucks to say out loud, but that is kind of the reality of the current situation with the Colts offense. So I'll take the Texans. They usually have a tight game with Indianapolis every single time, and I talked about that the first time these two teams matched up, and it did come down to the wire. So I'll take the Texans again, but I'll take them about 27-24. I think that the Colts do find some ways to score. For whatever reason, these games tend to be like this, but I do think Houston still comes out with the victory and clean sweeps this one. It's really hard to beat teams twice in a season, especially division rivals, but with the way the things have looked offensively for the Colts, I just have a really hard time buying into them here. And I don't know if I can take them for a victory, especially with this one being in Houston. I think their best shot was when they had Houston and Indianapolis, and they kind of let that one go. Now we'll look at the Green Bay Packers taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. This could be the game where Doug Peterson loses his job. A lot of people were talking about that last week with the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the New England Patriots in London. But this is actually the game, in my opinion, where that should really be the consideration here, because things could get ugly between Green Bay and Jacksonville. Jacksonville's defense has struggled big time this season, especially when it comes to dealing with the pass. When you look at their numbers right now, 2nd in passing yards per game allowed, most passing touchdowns allowed, and a whopping 7.1 yards per play for the pass overall. That puts them at 3rd most. You have to be somewhat worried if you're a Jacksonville Jaguars fan coming into this game here. I know that the defense looked good against the Patriots last week, but that Patriots offense, for what it's worth, coming overseas, coming in on a Friday, they were kind of doomed from the start. They brought back Ramondre Stevenson, in my opinion, a little too early at that. I don't think he should have played last week. So you see what Jordan Love is doing so far this season. He's 2nd in passing yards. He's averaging 3 passing touchdowns per game right now, and he's the only quarterback averaging that number. And I would have some concerns about what this defense has been doing. You have gotten some guys back in that secondary that should help out, but you're looking at a really talented group of wide receivers and just pass catchers overall in Green Bay being dealt from by a quarterback in Jordan Love, who is looking really good right now that he's knocked all the injury rust off and he's back to doing his thing. You're going to have your hands full in Jacksonville. I will say that one thing I would expect from Jacksonville to try to avoid the whole high-scoring affair, because I don't quite know if Jacksonville can hang on if that ends up being the case, is they probably need to focus on running the football, and I kind of expect them to. I harped on this a lot in last week's matchup against the Patriots, and I was glad to see that they finally kind of leaned into it here. You look at what Tank Bigsby has been doing in relief of Travis Etienne, and at this point, Tank Bigsby is kind of like, it almost feels like he might be stealing the running back 1 job with the way he's been playing. He's averaging 6.2 yards per attempt. He's tied for 2nd this season so far with that number, and I believe he's only behind Derrick Henry, if I'm not mistaken, and because Derrick Henry's just having an ungodly season. But when you look at that, coupled with the fact that he is 1st in yards after contact with 5.3, and he has the 4th highest missed tackle rate this season, according to Next Gen Stats. When you look at Green Bay, they've been about slightly above average against the run, 13th in rushing yards per game, 9th in yards per attempt allowed. This will be a tough test for Green Bay here, and also a good kind of prove it type of thing for a, better than average run defense in Green Bay for Tank Bigsby. I think they really need to lean on the ground game just to avoid the potential of a game that winds up turning into a shootout, and you don't want to give Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers offense too many opportunities, because they can take advantage of it and they'll put the points up. Again, Jordan Love is averaging 3 passing touchdowns a game. He's good for dealing out 21 points a game right now at minimum, and you want to avoid that if you're Jacksonville. The other thing is they got to protect the football, plain and simple. Green Bay has a +6 turnover differential right now to Jacksonville's -4. Green Bay is also leading the league right now in total takeaways defensively by 3. They're sitting on 17. The next closest team's at 14. They will take the football away. We were talking about Xavier McKinney's streak not too long ago with interceptions. I think he went 5 straight games before he didn't have an interception in a game. So, I mean, you have got to take care of the football if you are Jacksonville, and that has been kind of their Achilles heel this season. They have been very much comfortable with giving the football away. As for who I think is going to win, again, my reservations about Jacksonville right now and just everything that's going on, it makes it really hard for me to lean on them and want to pick them in this, even if the game is in Jacksonville. But they've also been in London the last couple of weeks, so coming back and readjusting might take a little bit. You spent half a month there if you really think about it. So that is something that is kind of weighing on me as well, and it might give Green Bay a little bit of a leg up despite the game being a road matchup. So I'll take the Packers. I have them winning 28-19. I just think that we could see maybe the defense giving the Jacksonville Jaguars some issues. Again, coming back from London after being gone for a couple of weeks. Like, you talk about the benefit of being out there for a couple of weeks. I think there is a negative coming off the backside of that as well. Even if you have been back for a few days now, that is something that some people might still be getting over. Maybe not, but it is something that I'm thinking about. So just keep that in mind as well. But I'll take Green Bay. Now we'll look at, and this is a really interesting matchup here, the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Miami Dolphins. This is a game that I feel like you don't really see that often here, but I'm looking forward to it because obviously Tua is coming back. There's a lot of conversation right now going on just about the concussion and whether he should or should not be playing. The reality is Tua clearly loves the game of football. And I'm assuming that the support system around him has brought up the concerns. Doctors have clearly brought up the concerns to them as well. But if there's one thing beyond the love of the game that's probably keeping Tua from just stepping away outright, you have $100 million coming your way over the next couple of seasons if you're Tua. If it's me and I'm Tua, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm probably coming back myself. Like, that's a reckless thing to say, but at the same time, you're not just going to get $100 million somewhere else. And yeah, he's probably made a decent chunk of change already in his life, but $100 million is a number that's just so hard to actually imagine. If I could get $100 million over the next couple of years, I'm probably risking a couple of concussions myself, to be completely honest with you. I get where he's coming from. It's also a risk, but it's his risk to make, and it's his choice to make. So hopefully all goes well for him. When you look at the way this offense has been operating minus Tua, I'm sure the Dolphins are excited to have him back. Miami is 27th in passing yards per game right now, and I'm honestly surprised they're not dead last with how bad it's been for them. But they have been able to run the football fairly successfully, but it's been hindered because there's just literally been no passing threat. Now that you're able to actually have a threat in the quarterback position and throw the football to guys like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, I think things are really going to open back up for this Miami offense here. And when you look at Arizona, currently allowing the 7th most passing yards per game and the 2nd most yards per play through the passing game, there's a really good opportunity for Tua to come back and just kind of hit the ground running with his guys. On top of that, when you look at what the Arizona Cardinals are doing offensively, another thing I'll be keeping an eye on here is the Miami Dolphins defense as a whole and how they managed to defend a guy like James Conner. This is somebody who is so low-key underappreciated throughout the league because I think he's in Arizona and they just have not been super relevant in terms of the playoffs of the last few years. But James Conner is sitting on 504 yards rushing right now, averaging 4.6 yards per attempt. Miami's ranked 16th against the run right now in terms of yards per game, and they're allowing about a 4.6 yards per attempt number. There is a good chance that James Conner gives that defense some fits. Miami's defense has not necessarily been the greatest by any means. They're not the worst. They're somewhere within the middle, give or take, maybe a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on the week. But there is a good shot that he's given them some problems on the ground. And when you combine that with the fact that Kyler Murray has been an absolute menace on the ground for defenses to deal with, when he's having a good game, he's typically averaging anywhere north of 10.5 to 11 yards per carry when he takes off with the football. And on his overall average is about 8.5 yards per attempt. So he's typically ripping close to about a first down every time he takes off with the football here. And with Miami currently leading the league in pressure rate, getting after Kyler is going to be key. They just have to make sure they're not being too overly aggressive and losing containment, because between what James Conner's been doing on the ground and what Kyler Murray can do with his legs, he is giving defenses problems. There's a reason that the Cardinals are sitting at 3-4 and they're not currently sitting at 2-5 or 1-6, something like that. It's because that 1-2 punch between Conner and Kyler Murray is a very real thing, and it's catching some teams off week in and week out. So, I mean, we're talking about a Cardinals team that just beat the 49ers not too long ago. So definitely something the Dolphins need to take care of. As for who I think is going to win, Something tells me we're going to see some points in this game here. I'm not really overly impressed by either one of these defenses, and there are some injury concerns as far as the defense goes for the Miami Dolphins, with just some guys that are either limited in practice right now or not participating in practice. The big ones for me is that there's just a decent amount of guys, and the cornerback room might be a little bit thin for Miami. It's not starters per se, but it is definitely something you have to think about with just how thin the room might be and guys maybe getting to be able to take a break every now and again if they need to. And then as far as the Arizona Cardinals side is concerned, I'm just not super high on their defense as it is, but you have defensive tackles like Darius Robinson and Roy Lopez that are both currently have not participated in practice between Wednesday and Thursday, and then a guy like Dennis Gardeck on top of that who hasn't participated, Sean Murphy-Bunting. Your defense is already not that great, and you have some key guys that could potentially miss this game because they're not practicing at all. We could see some points. I'll take the Dolphins, 30-23. High-scoring affair, should be fun one in Miami. A little bit of a track meet, if you will, but I do think Miami comes out on top with the return of Tua under center. Now we'll take a look at an AFC East clash. This one's going to be the Jets and the Patriots here. And I think the big question that everyone's asking after the big trade last week, and I don't want to say being a non-factor, but it did not, I think, live up to the initial expectations of Davante Adams joining New York. Everyone's probably wondering, how is Davante Adams going to look against the Patriots? Christian Gonzalez has spent the bulk of his career when playing the Jets in the last couple of matchups that they've had, lining up across from Garrett Wilson. And he and Garrett Wilson have had some battles. Wilson's only managed about 43 yards and a touchdown in those battles there. But I'm curious to see now what the Patriots have to do with Christian Gonzalez, being that you have now Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson flanking Rodgers on either side. You have to pick a side. So someone's going to be responsible with the other guy. And I'm curious to see how much opens up for either one of those two players, whether it's Garrett Wilson or Davante Adams himself. The other thing that I'm looking at as far as the Patriots are concerned is going to be how they handle running the football on the ground. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Jaguars, Ramondre Stevenson struggled last week coming out of that injury, and 7 carries for 18 yards. I really feel like that was kind of a mistake bringing him back for that game. I think they should have just waited, because if I'm not mistaken and remembering correctly, when I picked that game, I anticipated that Ramondre was not going to be playing, and I'm pretty sure it was announced like Saturday last minute that he was going to. So I think they maybe jumped the gun a little bit to try to bring someone like him back to the team for this game in hopes of getting a victory, and it didn't really work out. But he's been playing really good this series, averaging 4.3 yards per attempt. The Jets' run defense has allowed nearly 300 yards in the last couple of games since Jeff Ulbrich has taken over as head coach. So there is a chance that the Patriots can run the football successfully. And I don't really think that the Jets necessarily run away with this game. I think the Patriots hang around with them. It's probably going to be a little bit better of a performance considering just the current state and situation that we have seen from the Jets. But I'm still leaning more so New York than anything else. The quarterback battle is also just a really interesting thing to look at. You have Aaron Rodgers, 40 years old, going up against a 22-year-old Drake May. But May's also been a real positive for this offense. 5 touchdowns in his first couple of games. He had a couple of picks that first game there in 2 starts, but 500 yards as well. I believe he joined Dan Marino as one of only 2 quarterbacks to have over 500 yards passing and 5 touchdowns in their first 2 games. Not bad company to find yourself in. Dan Marino, legend. But Aaron Rodgers himself sitting with 10 touchdowns, 7 picks though. That's been the big thing, is Aaron Rodgers has, whether it's just a miscommunication on routes supposedly being run, or maybe like he and the wide receiver on choice routes seeing different things and the ball winding up in the wrong place, or just bad throws from Rodgers' end. He has thrown a handful of picks in the last few weeks. I believe 6 in the last 3 games, if I'm remembering that correctly. So that is definitely something to keep an eye on here. You're seeing a rookie quarterback not really putting the ball in a ton of bad spots. He did have a couple of dropped picks last week that maybe could have made the game look a little bit wider. But overall, this is an interesting game here. 2 teams not in a great spot right now. 2-5 Jets, 1-6 Patriots. But I am going to lean to the Jets here. They have more talent on that roster in New York. And even if this game is in Foxborough, the Jets should be coming out victorious here. They should be winning this football game. So I'll take them 23-17. But I expect this one to be closer than the first time around. Drake May does add a plus kind of thing to this offense here, where you can expect a little bit more out of them, and it also forces teams to respect the deep ball, open up the defense a little bit more, maybe open some things up for the run a little bit more, especially if Ramondre Stevenson's really ready to go this week. But I do still think the Jets can get the job done and win 23-17. Now we have ourselves an NFC South clash, so more division action here. Falcons heading into Tampa Bay to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in their creamsicle uniforms here. I'm really excited to see these. These are one of my favorite uniforms in the NFL, in large part because I honestly think they're hideous, but it makes me love them because of that, and it's really exciting. I love these throwback uniforms. I'm so glad the NFL made it a point to allow teams to start doing this again, because this is something the NFL was missing for a really long time. Round 2 of this matchup, I think, is going to have some fireworks again, but unfortunately, I'm a little bit worried that it's going to be a one-sided show. It's always extremely difficult to beat teams twice, as I mentioned earlier in the season with the Colts and Texans matchup, and the same thing obviously applies here. Division rivals, same type of deal, except there is kind of an exception now with the fact that the Buccaneers lost both of their starting wide receivers in last week's losing effort to the Ravens, and I really think that might hurt this team down the stretch here. The expectation for me, and as far as what Tampa Bay does, is they're probably going to lean on their rushing attack. They've been finding that they have a lot of talent in their running back room as of late, with a trio of Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and now even Sean Tucker as well, who exploded on the scene just a couple of weeks ago here. Tampa Bay's averaging 168 yards rushing per game since week 4 right now. And Atlanta, for what it's worth, they're allowing the 9th most rushing yards per game overall this season at 137. So there is a good chance that Tampa Bay maybe does find some more success on the ground. And honestly, if they had leaned into the run game a little bit more the last time around these two teams played, they might come out victorious here. But that does not change the fact that Tampa Bay has not been great defending the pass. They are allowing the 4th most passing yards per game allowed. Lamar Jackson just threw for 281 and 5 touchdowns last week. And the last time Kirk Cousins saw this defense, granted it was a game that went into overtime, but he chucked the ball for 500 yards. That is going to be a problem for this team. And it's not like this team isn't necessarily in the healthiest position right now. If for whatever reason Tampa Bay's offense is stalling out and you're just giving the ball back to Atlanta, there is a good chance that Kirk Cousins and company over there are taking advantage of that and they're dicing you. So that is definitely one of the reasons why I think they maybe lean on the ground game and try to really control the clock and just play like ball control throughout the majority of this matchup. I'm also just curious, like, who Baker Mayfield is realistically going to be throwing the football to. Cade Otton is second on the team in receptions, and then behind him, it's literally Bucky Irving and Rachaad White as pass catchers before you start to get to any other wide receivers. It literally goes like, it's like, I believe if I'm remembering correctly, it went Godwin, Cade Otton, Evans, your 2 running backs, and then you start getting the other wide receivers. So you have Sterling Shepard, who has literally 8 receptions so far this season. You have Jalen McMillan, who has 6, and Trey Palmer, who has 5. 2 of these guys realistically need to step up, and I think you're hoping it's Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan because Sterling Shepard's 31, but like you want one of those 2 guys that are a little bit on the younger side to really step up and be a focal point in this offense here. I have no idea who's going to really step up and be that guy. I would maybe lean more so Jalen McMillan than anything else because that feels like something Tampa Bay would want to have happen. And also, of course, Cade Otton's probably going to see a lot more coming his way over the middle. But I'm concerned about what this offense looks like in Tampa Bay. Like, you got like a double whammy of injuries last week, and it is not ideal. So I do think they fall here to the Falcons 29-20. I just don't think they have the firepower to keep up. I think that they can find some points because Atlanta's defense maybe hasn't quite been as good as some people anticipated, considering some of the moves they made this offseason. But I do like Atlanta coming into this one here, 29-20. Now we'll look at the Bengals and the Eagles in Cincinnati. This is actually one of my favorite matchups of the weekend because it's very much up in the air. I don't think there is a surefire winner in this contest. When I look at Cincinnati, though, first thing that comes to mind is that defense and just how difficult it has been for them to stop the run. And now they're facing a guy like Saquon Barkley, who is on an absolute tear, who literally chose not to break a career high in rushing last week just because he didn't want to and he wanted to let some other guys get touches. Like, shout out to him, respect to that. Very humble type of thing to do. But Cincinnati right now allowing 136 rushing yards per game, good for 11th most in the league right now. They've also let up 8 touchdowns, and they have the 10th worst run stuff rate in the league. You're going up against Saquon Barkley, who's sitting on 658 for 3rd most in the NFL. He has 6.1 yards per attempt as his average, which is 4th best in the league. And he's averaging right now, if you really like those next-gen stats, 226 rushing yards over expected, which is 2nd best in the NFL, and I believe 1st is Derrick Henry. So Saquon Barkley is having himself a hell of a season in Philadelphia, all things considered. if Cincinnati cannot slow him down, that's going to be one of those things where it ends up falling on the offense. And we've seen Joe Burrow definitely, carry his weight, but it's one of those things where you would like to see the defense step up and be able to hang on against a guy like Saquon. Philadelphia, on the other hand, does need to find a way to stop Joe Burrow. Like I just mentioned, you look at his numbers right now, he's pushing near 1,800 yards so far this season, 14 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions with a 70% completion percentage. Now, Philadelphia, for what it's worth, is allowing only about 189 yards per game and only 7 touchdowns through the air allowed. But these numbers could be a little bit exaggerated because of the fact that they just played Cleveland, who that quarterback situation with Deshaun Watson, ugly. And then the Giants last week, that quarterback situation, also ugly, making those numbers look a little bit better than they might actually should. So this will be a really good test for Philadelphia. And I think it's a really good earmark for where your defense actually stands against the pass. The other thing I'm looking at, and this is more just I'm excited to see because I really want to see who steps up and ends up being the better duo, is going to be that wide receiver battle between both of these teams. In Cincinnati's case, you've got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. In Philadelphia, you got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, a 1-2 punch on both sides of the football field, no matter what offense is on the field. Currently, right now, as it stands, granted you have more balls going their way and more games played between the two, but you got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins who have racked up 68 receptions, 961 yards, 9 touchdowns, and are averaging 13.8 yards per reception as a pair. But when you look at what A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have done, yes, they've played a little bit less because of injuries. They've had fewer balls come their way. They have fewer receptions, but they're still sitting on a respective 625 yards, 5 touchdowns, and it's that yards per reception at 16.1 that really stands out to me. Currently, right now, if I'm remembering correctly, before I averaged out those numbers, A.J. Brown's averaging 20 yards a catch right now, which is a crazy number for someone who's seeing the volume that is coming his way. This dude is an absolute stud. So shout out A.J. Brown. That's a crazy number to have, but I'm really looking forward to seeing this wide receiver battle because I think you have 2 duos going up against 2 defenses that they could really take advantage of here. As for who I think is going to win, both of these teams come into this matchup relatively healthy. There's not a ton to look at when you look at the injury reports. I will say that Philadelphia, when you look at Mekhi Becton's currently dealing with a concussion. He has not participated in practice. You have Dallas Goedert, your tight end, who's dealing with a hamstring, and then Byron Young in the defense, who's also dealing with a hamstring. Both those guys have not participated in practice as well. Those are some names to watch. But, when you look at the Bengals end, there's really not too much to mention here. Orlando Brown Jr. and Geno Stone are 2 guys to keep an eye on, but they were limited as of Thursday, and there's a good chance they maybe end up playing. So you got 2 relatively healthy teams that, even if with a guy or 2 missing from either side, aren't really missing too much at this point in the season. I really think we're going to get a show on this one here. But being in Cincinnati and the Bengals just feel like they are really hot right now. And I kind of feel like the Eagles might be due for a loss against a good opponent since they've been kind of picking on a couple of bad teams the last 2 weeks. I think I'm going to take the Bengals 28-26. Good win, exciting win, good contest. And even if you're Philadelphia, you walk away from that game not really too upset. And the other thing is that I also think Cincinnati needs the game a little bit more. Sitting at 3-4, you're trying to save your season. They need this game a lot more than Philadelphia does, sitting at 4-2. So that is just one of those other things that might be giving Cincinnati just a little bit more drive, is they've got to win this game to keep their playoff hopes alive. You can't risk another loss and falling to 3-5, because then you're really putting yourself behind the 8 ball as far as the playoffs are concerned. Now we look at the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Chargers. Again, I'm not a betting guy. This is not a betting channel. I don't place bets. But if you're a bettor, this is a game that if you're betting on it, you probably need to call those gambling hotlines, because this is one of those stay the hell away from this kind of game situation, because even with the Chargers probably being the clearly better team coming into this one here, the Chargers have not quite played up to their level of play or just level of roster, in my opinion. And I think there's a definitive winner here, but this also feels like that game where you walk away and you go, how the hell did the Chargers lose that one? It sounds like Spencer Rattler is going to be the quarterback again for the Saints. Maybe we get some Jake Haener if things continue to look not so great there, but it does not seem like Derek Carr is trending to play. He hasn't participated in practice the last couple of days, and I just don't really anticipate him getting out there. Rattler struggled. He's 62% completion rate, touchdown, couple of interceptions. Pressure's really given him a lot of problems. And the Los Angeles Chargers defense, for what it's worth, pretty tough unit to go up against. They've only allowed 6 passing touchdowns this entire season right now. They're averaging less than a touchdown a game. Yeah, because they've played 6. And on top of that, only 184 yards per game. This is not necessarily the defense you want Spencer Rattler going up against. And if it really goes south, you don't really want to have to put Jake Haener in against either. Injuries continue to give the Saints a lot of issues right now. They went out and got Marquez Valdes-Scantling this week because they are so thin at wide receiver. But that is another reason why I'm really not high on where the Saints currently are. Between that and just injuries to the offensive line, this team has been decimated. And it's not like the Chargers come into this game perfect either. If you look at their injury report, it is a little bit concerning. You have wide receiver Ladd McConkey, wide receiver Quentin Johnson, and wide receiver Darius Davis, all listed as non-participants the first couple of days of practice. Couple that with Will Dissly, the tight end, as well. You're looking at a thin group of receivers if you're missing even just 2 of those guys. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. You even have DJ Chark, who's been limited this week as well. And like Hayden Hurst didn't participate Wednesday, limited on Thursday. The skill positions as a whole in LA are by no means healthy. So there's a lot to look at when you're looking at this matchup here. But I think the one thing that I can lean on that I really think is going to be kind of the bread and butter in this game for the Chargers is that their willingness to run the football is there. Clearly, Jim Harbaugh wants to pound the rock 30 times a game if he can. And when you look at New Orleans and how they are against the run right now, 3rd worst in rushing yards per game allowed. And on top of that, 2nd worst in yards per attempt allowed as well against teams that are running the football. You give the football to J.K. Dobbins, maybe see what Kamani Vidal can get you as well on the ground. They're probably getting a heavy workload. You don't want to force Justin Herbert to be throwing to guys that he maybe throws once or twice to a game, if that, multiple times in a game. So I think leaning on the ground game, leaning into the weakness of that Saints defense, probably the best bet here. And I'm thinking like a lower scoring game, Chargers 20-10, 20-13, something like that. Maybe the Saints find a way to score here or there, but like you also have the injury to Alvin Kamara now to his hand. If that's the case, how effective is he going to be catching out of the backfield? Because that's a big part of his game as well. And he's someone that you're relying on due to all these wide receiver issues that you have as far as injuries go. So I like the Chargers 2010, 2013, something along those lines, low scoring affair, but they should get the win in LA. They should. Next, we'll have ourselves a Buffalo Bills and Seattle Seahawks contest. This one in Seattle. So Buffalo going across the country. Quite the travel distance for this one here as you go all the way from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast here. Close to the East Coast, I should say. All the way to the West Coast. Seattle finally getting a good win last week over the Atlanta Falcons, a much-needed one against a team above 500 and what some people, or I guess a lot of people, consider a playoff contending team here. Seattle needs to force Josh Allen into making mistakes here. They currently have only 7 takeaways overall this season. They're not a team to force a lot of turnovers, but when you see the way Josh Allen's been playing, he's sitting on 15 total touchdowns this season and yet to make a mistake. He has 1 fumble that he didn't, and I don't even know if it got counted as a fumble at the end, but I'm pretty sure he only has 1 fumble and it wasn't recovered by the opponent. So like it's a wash. It doesn't even matter. He didn't turn the ball over. Whether that fumble is actually was credited or not, I can't remember, but I've only seen him put the ball in a bad spot once so far this season, and I've watched a lot of Bills stuff because I very much enjoy watching Josh Allen. If you can't stop him or you can't force him into making a mistake, it's going to be a long game for your defense because this defense in Seattle has not been healthy, and there's a lot of guys on that injury report again that are not participating in practice and could lead to more guys missing again this week. Or you have guys that come back that might not even be 100%, but are going to get out there because you absolutely need them to. For Seattle, I think the big thing for them offensively, leaning into Kenneth Walker and just allowing him to do what he does best, and that is absolutely bully teams on the ground. I would like to see them do this, and I also kind of expect to see them do this as well, just to control, or try to at least control the football game. Kenneth Walker, in the 5 games that he's played, 303 yards, 6 touchdowns with a 4.7 yard per attempt average. He's also an effective catcher out of the backfield as well. Buffalo's allowing the 4th highest yards per attempt against the run right now this season at a whopping 5.1. They're also tied for 4th in runs over 10 yards or more allowed. So there is some room for Seattle to really dictate the pace of this game if they're just running the rock with Kenneth Walker. The other thing I'm looking at is going to be Amari Cooper, because this is where I think the Bills made an excellent move, because even if Amari Cooper maybe isn't quite the speedster he was a few years ago, he is an incredible route runner, and the guy just moves like a knife through hot butter when you watch him going around the football field. You saw what he did last week in his first game, and he literally has other wide receivers, like rookie wide receivers at that, like trying to help him get lined up in certain plays. You can literally see them like motioning to him in some of the plays. And he still managed 4 receptions for 66 yards and a touchdown. Seattle's allowed 10 passing touchdowns this season, and like I mentioned, the injuries in the secondary are starting to get a little bit concerning, because you currently have Trey Brown, who's still not practicing. On top of that, you have Nehemiah, I believe it's Pitchett, who has been limited in practice and also did not participate, and Tariq Woolen, who missed last week as well and has been limited in practice this week. There's a potential that you could once again be down 2 or 3 corners in this game. So you're already going to be thin there, and Buffalo was building in that wide receiver room to make this team a threatening team in the air. And with what Amari Cooper was able to do last week, give him another week in the system, a little more time to build some rapport with Josh Allen, things could get a little bit crazy. And it's been rough for Seattle against the pass the last few weeks. They're allowing 247 yards per game since week 5. I have some concerns about what this defense can do. Now, they did look good for what it's worth for the most part last week against Atlanta. Like, they really put Atlanta in their place, especially the fact that they came across the country to do it in their house. But I wouldn't look at Atlanta and say that they're Buffalo as far as offense goes. I would probably take Buffalo's offense over Atlanta's just about, if I was to do it 10 times, like 8 times out of 10 maybe, most likely. I think Buffalo probably gives them a little bit more of a problem, but there is a chance that Seattle can find some success offensively as well. So I think we're looking at a high-scoring game, 31-28. But I'm going Buffalo on this one here. I think we're going to get some fireworks. There's some really good games lined up for some good points this week, and Buffalo, Seattle is definitely one of those games to me. This next game here, Chicago and Washington, I'm picking this game with the idea that Jaden Daniels is not going to play because he hasn't participated in practice this week, and I'm kind of concerned about it. I think the rib injury is not doing too well for him. That seems to be still very much up for conversation, but I'm picking with the idea that he's not going to be 100% if he does play, and if he doesn't play, I'm a little bit concerned. Marcus Mariota, for what it's worth, looked really good last week, but it was against the Carolina Panthers of all team, and they suck. So that is what that is. Chicago's defense, a little bit of a different story. Don't really think that Marcus Mariota is going to have that same kind of success against Chicago. They are tough throwing the football against, allowing just 180 yards per game. And on top of that, they have 7 interceptions as well. Marcus Mariota, again, 18 of 23, 205, couple of touchdowns last week. Really good performance, moved really well, was putting the ball in some really good spots here. And Mariota can use his legs, but he's not quite as dynamic as Jaden Daniels is at this point in his career. He's still mobile, but not Jaden Daniels mobile. And I think that is something that could pose an issue for Washington's offense, because that O-line is not great over there, but Jaden Daniels does a really good job in hiding all of that because he's so elusive. The other thing I'll be curious to see is how Washington's defense handles what's been kind of like a rapid improvement over the last handful of weeks of Chicago's offense and of Caleb Williams. Chicago's begun to find some success going deep with the football, but the one thing that has worked really well for them and has set everything up and they've become very efficient with is throwing the football in the short and quick passing game. According to Next Gen Stats, they're getting the ball out very quickly and in very short increments as well. They're currently ranked as the number 5 short passing offense and number 6, quick passing offense. So that being getting the ball out in 2.5 seconds or less, and then also for the short game, anywhere from 1 to 10 yards, I believe is the range. They're getting the football out quick, and they're getting it to their playmakers who are taking that football and getting downfield, and it really opens things up to allow Caleb Williams to take some of those shots that we've been seeing him get over the last few weeks. I really go back to the game against the Colts as to when that started to open up, because they shortened up a lot of the passes late in that game. And granted, in my opinion, Chicago should have won that game, but they came up short. The way I see it is that game was kind of the catalyst for what set up their offense kind of starting to open things up more and for Caleb Williams to get more comfortable. They're really good at kind of getting the ball rolling, and then the offense just starts to go vertical. So I like what they're doing over there. And with Washington, they are one of the worst teams in the NFL when it comes to teams that throw it short or throw it quickly. They're ranked 27th and 29th respectively. That could be a problem for Washington's defense, who I've been talking about for a while as more of a suspect unit. And then as far as who wins on the ground, we've got two teams with some really good running backs here. Brian Robinson's at nearly 400 yards right now, 6 touchdowns, and he's averaging 4.7 yards per attempt. And then DeAndre Swift, who in the last 3 weeks has really come on strong. He's sitting on 325 yards this season and only 3 touchdowns. But in the last 3 weeks specifically, he's averaging 4.9 yards per attempt. His season average is 3.6, but the yards per attempt in the last 3 weeks has bumped up to 4.9. So whoever wins on the ground, I think, really separates themselves here. And again, Washington's defense, a little bit suspect to me, in my opinion. You couple that with there's a lot of guys in the injury report for Washington. If there was a time for them to drop a football game, it's possibly going to be this game against the Bears. So I'm taking Chicago 24-17. It's the injuries more than anything else that are really scaring me away from Washington. If Daniels plays, there is a good chance they could pull the upset. But right now, with that all being up in the air, I just can't confidently pick Washington without knowing just how healthy he's going to be going into that game. And him not practicing both Wednesday and Thursday is scaring me away from Washington. The next game, we got the Carolina Panthers heading into Denver to take on the Broncos. The obligatory conversation we have every week about a football matchup, but we all know who I'm going to pick at the end of this, but we'll talk about it anyways. After putting up only 7 points last week against Washington, I really don't know how Carolina is going to handle Denver's defense, because Denver's defense is a really good unit. And on top of that, Bryce Young is going to be the starter this week, because if you didn't hear, Andy Dalton, family in a car accident. Glad to hear they're all okay. But he will not be starting this week for them. It will be Bryce Young. Carolina's sitting on a minus 133 point differential right now this season. That is the worst in the league by about 60, almost 60. I believe 57 is the exact number. New England is the second closest at minus 76. So Carolina is far and away playing like the worst football team in the league, and averaging just under 16 points a game right now. They're going up against Denver, who's allowing just about 15 points a game. Denver's also allowing just 5th as far as passing yards per game is concerned. They're ranked, not allowing. They are ranked 5th in terms of passing yards per game allowed, and they're ranked 10th in rushing yards per game allowed. I really don't know how Carolina is going to find a way to move the ball effectively. And in my opinion, if Andy Dalton's not getting into a car accident this week, Bryce Young's not playing this week. So I don't really know what improvements we are going to expect to see from Bryce Young in this offense here. And Denver, for what it's worth offensively, the only real struggle they have right now is Bo Nix facing pressure. He's like 2 completely different quarterbacks when that's going on. But Carolina, they have the second fewest sacks in the league with 7. They have the 7th worst pressure rate in the league. They couple that with the fact that Carolina has the worst run defense in literally I think it's like the league's worst or second worst run defense. Maybe it's only Dallas. I forget which one of them two has the worst, but they're one of the worst at what they do in just about every facet of the game. If Denver just takes care of the football, doesn't make mistakes, they shouldn't lose this game. I'm going to take Denver, and I'm going to have them winning 36-13. I think that the defense makes some plays. We probably get a defensive touchdown. We might even get a special teams touchdown. But I do think we see at least a defensive score. We see Bo Nix have a really good game here, and the Broncos run away with this contest. Now we'll take a look at another divisional clash, and this time we're looking at the AFC West with the Kansas City Chiefs going into Las Vegas to take on the Raiders. I'm kind of expecting a defensive slugfest here. Something is telling me defenses in this game. The offense of the Raiders possibly not going to look very good, but I think that the Raiders defense can do enough to maybe slow Kansas City down just a little bit so that Kansas City doesn't just completely run away with the game. And it being in Las Vegas, I think maybe adds to that in my thinking a little bit as well. But the first thing I'll be looking for is obviously DeAndre Hopkins. How much is he playing? How involved is he in the offense? Are they scheming him up specifically? What is he going to be doing in game number 1 as a Kansas City Chief? Mahomes has struggled with interceptions this season. He has 8 on the year. Las Vegas has not necessarily been the greatest at taking the football away through the air. They only have 3 picks so far, and Mahomes versus the Raiders is, the stat line's not pretty, but we'll talk about it anyways. 30 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and averaging about 300 yards per game. Las Vegas this season is allowing only 180 yards through the air, which is 8th fewest in the league, but I'm curious to see what this game looks like for the Chiefs offense, because DeAndre Hopkins does add a massive factor to this offense that teams have to consider. I've been seeing a lot of people going, this is not DeAndre Hopkins from a few years ago. And while that is true, that is a fair statement to make. DeAndre Hopkins still has probably the best hands in the league. If not, he's within the top 3. And that's been something he's been known for his entire career. Your hands don't get necessarily older the same way your speed does, like your legs slow down. But you can still be a great route runner. And on top of that, one of the best high pointers, one of the best hands in the league. He's still a dude nonetheless. And he's been rotting away in Tennessee, unfortunately. So hopefully Kansas City can clean him up, shine him up real nice, and put him on display for the rest of the NFL to see the rest of this season here. I'm really excited for this. Gardner Minshew is going to be back at quarterback for Las Vegas due to Aiden O'Connell's injury, so some more quarterback drama there, and Desmond Ridder will be his backup as well. So I'm curious to see if things go really south. Do we maybe see Desmond Ridder get thrown to the Wolves this week? That is going to be crazy if that ends up happening. Kansas City, for what it's worth, hasn't necessarily been the craziest pass defense this year. That is kind of where they struggle at times. They're allowing about 216 as far as yards go per game, 20th in the league, but they do have the 12th best pressure rate. So you're basically relying heavily on Brock Bowers because Michael Mayer's hurt, and on top of that, Jacoby Meyer as well to be your 2 lead guys that you need to get the football to find success against this Kansas City secondary and pass defense overall. But I really don't know where they're going to find that success from, because there was a lot more talent on the field last week when they went against the 49ers, and Kansas City went into San Francisco and won that game pretty handedly. So I'm a little bit concerned about what the Raiders are going to be able to do offensively. You couple that with the fact that Kareem Hunt, this is something that I want to set this narrative out there. Kareem Hunt might be one of the biggest signings that we've seen a team make this season, because when Isaiah Pacheco went down, there was the concern of what the Chiefs would do on the ground as far as running the football goes. He has been a savior for this offense to help prevent it from completely falling off a cliff, because the passing game has not been perfect. And now DeAndre Hopkins is coming in, and that's probably going to open things up even further. But to this point, he has stepped in, racked up 250 yards. He's scored 3 touchdowns on the ground. He's averaging 4 yards per attempt. He has been monumental in keeping this offense in a steady rhythm, and in situations where maybe they weren't necessarily throwing the football well, they were able to count on Kareem Hunt to run the football pretty well. This is one of those low-key signings that I don't think is being talked about enough, and is kind of not he's not the savior of Kansas City's offense, but he definitely saved them from being a one-dimensional team that was going to have to over-rely on Patrick Mahomes and Carson Steele as their running back to maybe get this offense moving, because the passing game hasn't been perfect, and Mahomes been making some bad throws. So this is one of those things that it needs to get talked about more. And Kansas City fans, I see it, and I want you all to know I'm aware. But the reason I'm bringing all that up, Las Vegas allowing the 10th most rushing yards per game this season at about 137. This is one of those things where even if KC is struggling to throw the ball, Kareem Hunt has been so big for this offense. They can stay balanced. They can stay effective. You're averaging 4 yards per clip. Not a bad average to be at. You can count on him on 3rd and short, maybe 2nd and medium to get you in position for a nice short 3rd down. I'm not too worried about KC in this game here, especially the way they went into San Francisco last week and beat down San Fran. But we'll see how it shakes out. Division rival matchup, maybe a little bit closer. 21-17 though. Give me the Chiefs. They get the W. Now, looking at Sunday Night Football, the 2 primetime games that we have left here. We'll start with Sunday night. We have the Dallas Cowboys heading into San Francisco to take on the 49ers. Big question is, of course, who is catching passes from Brock Purdy with Brandon Ayuk out and all these other wide receiver injuries that they're currently dealing with. The 49ers offense is averaging nearly about 26 points per game right now to Dallas's 21. And on the flip side, when you look at what the defenses are allowing, San Fran sitting at about 22.5 to Dallas's 28. Something is going on in Dallas, and a lot of it has to do with the injuries. And when you look at the defensive line over there, they are really, really struggling with depth and just being able to be effective up front, whether it's trying to stop the run or creating pressure against opposing quarterbacks. And it's one of those things that it's like, how can you prepare to have so many guys on your defensive line injured? Like no one's anticipating DeMarcus Lawrence being on IR, Micah Parsons not having been able to play for the last few weeks and continuing to not practice. Like, there's so much going on with them right now that it's kind of not surprising that they're having these struggles. And it's one of those things that you're going to get put to the test against this offense in San Francisco. They are 5th in rushing yards per game rushing yards per game forced. So they're a team that loves to run the football, and they love to be physical up front if they can be. So you're going to be put to the test again this week. And Dallas, for what it's worth, one of the worst run defenses in the league right now because of that situation, could be an issue there. We could also see a lot of passing from both these teams. As we know, both of these quarterbacks have no issues throwing the football. Brock Purdy's been a little bit wonky with some of his throws, though. He has had some bad passes, and I think he's had 2 games now this season where he's thrown 3 picks, if I'm not mistaken. So that is not great, and you're hoping he can clean some of that up. Maybe that has to do with just the amount of injuries and issues they've dealt with in the wide receiver room and guys missing time, but that is definitely something that needs to be cleaned up. Both these offenses have not been great protecting the ball. They're both sitting on 11 turnovers, which is tied for 4th in the NFL. But this is one of those games where I think injuries are really going to play a factor because both sides are hurting and they're down and out, and it makes it difficult to decide on who you think's going to win. And with the game being in San Francisco, I'm looking at these injury reports, and the key guys that you want to see back for Dallas, like Micah Parsons, Deron Bland, they're not going to be back. And on top of that, they're just so thin on the defensive line right now. It makes me hard to lean their way. So I'm going to go San Francisco. I have concerns about, again, who's going to be catching from Brock Purdy in this game here, but from the looks of it, Deebo Samuel and George Kittle did not participate on Wednesday, but got upgraded to a limited participation on Thursday. So I'm hoping today they get to practice, and that gets them closer to playing on Sunday. And that'll make me feel a lot better about going San Francisco 26-23, something like that, to get the win. But being in San Fran with some of those key guys that you want playing more than likely going to be on the field, as opposed to that, like for San Francisco, as opposed to what Dallas has going on right now, I'm more comfortable going San Fran for the W. And then to wrap up the weekend slate of games, we got ourselves on Monday, the Giants, the New York Football Giants, going into Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. Between the injuries and your only notable offensive player at this point healthy, literally being Malik Neighbors, it feels. Maybe Darius Slayton if you want to throw him in there, because I like Darius Slayton. I don't know where this offense goes. Between injuries that have taken guys out, like losing Andrew Thomas on the left tackle side, and just the injuries on defense that New York is dealing with. Kayvon Thibodeau's on IR right now. You also have 3 cornerbacks right now that are on the injury report. Brian Burns is on there. Dexter Lawrence is on there. Your offense managed 3 points and 119 yards total against Philadelphia last week. Drew Lock had to come in. He didn't really do much for them. And the defense allowed 339 yards and 4 touchdowns to Philadelphia on top of that. This Giants team feels like it's collapsing in the most ugly of manner. And we had that weird thing that happens in New York where Mara comes out, he says they're not going to make a change, and then it typically happens in about 2 weeks. We wind up seeing the head coach getting fired, a change being made, and then it's another reset. And he talked about not being patient enough, in previous coaching situations. But it is one of those things where that happens, and you just have to hope that that's not the case this time around. But this looks awfully familiar from the outside looking in. You have Pittsburgh coming in. They're at home. Their defense is an absolute unit. They are the second best run defense in the league in terms of yards per game allowed. They've allowed only 8 passing touchdowns. They let some teams move through the air, but they don't let them finish off and score. They're allowing just 14.5 points per game right now. And on top of that, Russell Wilson came in last week. And he looked good. Over 200 yards passing, I think over 250 if I'm remembering correctly. A couple of touchdowns, no interceptions, couple of throws that weren't necessarily the greatest and left you scratching your head, but not bad by any means. I don't know how you look at this game and pick the Giants confidently. Oh, and then on top of that, Alex Highsmith is back too. So like this defense is coming into full form. Russell Wilson looked really good, and the offense looks like it's going to flourish. And Pittsburgh is going to continue to play and hopefully get healthier. Some of the guys that they're missing, you're hoping to get back sooner rather than later. Like we're still waiting for guys like Cameron Hayward and Nick Frazier, who are all DNPs on the practice report so far from Thursday. But like there is a chance that Pittsburgh is rounding out into a legit Super Bowl contender right now. I don't know how you pick the Giants to win this football game. I'll take the Steelers 27-10. Pretty ugly contest. Probably not one you're going to want to stay up to watch, but the Steelers probably get the job done here. It would take a big oversight from Pittsburgh's end to drop this kind of game, and that's just not the Pittsburgh thing to do. Like they don't fall to trap games very typically. I'll take Pittsburgh pretty confidently 27-10. Those are my picks, though, for this week. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts, your opinions. What am I getting right? What am I getting wrong? Who do you have this week? Fire your picks in the comments below. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll catch you all next time. Have a good one.